In 2021, we were honored to do several podcasts with Dr. Gladys B. West, who served as a mathematician at the Naval Surface Warfare Center for 42 years. She was inducted by SSPI into the Industry Hall of Fame for, among other things, creating a mathematical model of unprecedented accuracy of the shape of the Earth, which proved to be a critical building block in the development of the Global Positioning by Satellite, GPS. Her story became well known thanks to us and, of course, to Hollywood. But how many more stories are there in the industry that are at risk of just slipping away? Well, we have a woman today who recovered one, and it is really one for the ages. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Better Satellite World, the podcast of Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Lou Zacharilla. Today we have another episode of the second The Road Less Traveled series, and we welcome a woman who worked in film and TV production for 13 years. She left that to become a co-owner of a company that develops single-family homes across Los Angeles. Raised in Compton, California, she spent her childhood listening to her godfather talk about his work on the USA's legendary Apollo program. Like many of us at a certain age, she felt that responsibility to keep a legacy alive, because a forgotten story and a forgotten name are the only true death. She went on a journey to keep her godfather's legacy alive and captured the experiences in a 4-part podcast, which she produced, wrote, and hosts. Joanne Higgins shares her experience making the other moonshot with us today on the Better Satellite World. The Better Satellite World is supported by the corporate partners of SSPI, along with our 3,000 members, people just like yourself. Thank you. Joanne Higgins, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lou, for having me. I'm just very, very happy to be here.
Well, we're completely blown away and honored to have you. Let's just start at the top of the story. Charlie Cheatham was Cheatham was the engineer who inspired your own mission, right, to tell this story. He was your godfather, as I said. Can you let's start off by talking a little about that relationship and how it evolved into your excavating a largely untold story about his role in putting Americans on the moon.
Well, I grew up with Charlie's daughter, who was my best friend and still is my best friend. I talk to her every day.
Wow.
And one of the things that I noticed about when Charlie would go to work each day is that he wore a suit and a tie. And that was in contrast to my father, who wore a uniform. So Charlie's working attire really, as a child, fascinated me because he always looked like he was going someplace really special. So I became very curious about what he did. I later found out he worked in the aerospace industry, which at the time, I was very young, did not mean a whole lot to me.
Right. Yeah. The aerospace industry, right? Like, what is that? Now, so where was he going to work? What
at the time he was working for North American Aviation, which was early on, they built aircraft, and he was working on bombers, B-15 bombers, and they were located out by the airport, out by LAX. Then when they took on the Apollo program, they actually had a space division, which was located in Downey, California. Mm-hmm. So Charlie transferred to the aerospace division in Downey.
And so what years are we talking about? Is this early 60s, Joanne?
Well, Charlie actually started as an engineer early in his life. In 1951 is when he started working.
Okay.
Yes. But the aerospace industry started somewhere like, I'm going to say, in the late 50s, early 60s.
And how about the actual Apollo program? When did he get that assignment or make that move?
Actually, that is such a good question. I don't quite remember the year of that exactly. But
Had to be early 60s though, right? Because
yeah, that was the early 60s when
yeah,
he went over to Apollo, right?
it's around the time. Well, it would have had to have been the time President Kennedy committed us right to the moon, and I think that was 61 or 60, 1961 or 62.
Exactly, right.
Right. But you were just a
Mhm.
kid. You were just fascinated to see your godfather in a suit. You weren't tracking dates and learning about modules and capsules and
No,
landing
uh,
lunar landers
no,
at that point.
yes, exactly. I was just yeah, playing outside and doing what kids do. I
Right.
just and the thing that I loved about Charlie is that he always had time to talk to kids.
Really.
Like unlike a lot of adults, Charlie was always imparting life lessons, sharing stories, talking a little bit about work. Yes.
Yeah.
So that it was great being paid attention to by a grown up.
Oh yeah. So he was also kind of a mentor in a way. Were you one of those kids who was always looking up at the moon and looking up at the stars and saying, "I wonder"?
No, I was not one of those kids. I was one of those kids who watched a lot of TV, um, loved science fiction, space shows, that kind of thing. Loved Star Trek and uh, was a Trekkie. So
Yeah.
I was,
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of person. I kind of like backed into space with the onset of the podcast and deciding to do it.
Well, really, so Charlie didn't really trigger anything at that time in you to say,
No,
"No, that's so interesting." So
no,
you recover
because
this years later.
yes, yes, and I was not. I didn't see myself involved in science or space because I knew there was math involved, and I really was
Right.
so bad at math that I
Right.
I knew I wouldn't really be accepted wholeheartedly.
Right.
So yeah, so no, I just it wasn't anything I entertained.
Right. So you weren't Gladys West. Let's assume that.
Yes, that's
Not
true.
not too many of us are. But you're bad at math, but really good at imagination. What's interesting, of course, is who your godfather was and the racial conditions at the time in the United States. You say people are still surprised to learn that Black engineers were involved in Apollo missions, and that Los Angeles actually played a key role in that as well. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. First of all, I'm surprised that people are surprised, but what role did these engineers, people like your godfather, like Nate and Shelby, who were also in the podcast, what role did they play in that program?
Well, Nate actually helped to build the rocket propellant system and designed the second stage rocket's gas distributor on the early Apollos. And Charlie developed a system called configuration management, which was a tracking system that would track all the pieces. And this system was essential with regards to manufacturing and troubleshooting, because if something went up into space and it came apart, you needed to be able to track each one of those pieces.
Mm,
And Charlie developed this system. Shelby designed a camera system that was able to capture an iconic photo of the curvature of the Earth from space,
wow.
while at the same time capturing the rocket stage separation in space as well. So these men really made incredible contributions
Oh
to the
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I mean, and again, this was all new. I mean, this wasn't like, there were a lot of blueprints, right, as
Right.
to what would happen. So, and a lot of rockets blew up.
Yeah, exactly. Because research and development, my favorite story that Charlie tells me is when they went to the Apollo program, he basically said NASA gave them a piece of paper that said, get us as close to the vicinity of the moon as you can.
Hmm.
There wasn't even in the beginning this talk of landing, just get us close.
It is close.
Yes.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, talk about the frontier. Were the three of them personal friends, or were they just colleagues?
No, they, in fact, well, Charlie only met Nate actually about a month ago for the first time, even though they all worked uh, at the same facility. But Shelby and Nate were very, very good friends. They had met at North American and Downey and stayed friends.
And when they talk about the experience, and do they talk about the social aspects of it, or is it still? I mean, knowing what we know about engineers, and we know billions of them through SSPI, they love to talk. They love to talk shop almost endlessly, almost like like baseball players like to talk about their bats or something, the kind of wood they make.
Yes, that's very true. In fact, that is how I really initially got interested in Charlie's story, or how it invigorated me again. He happened to end up in the hospital, and I went to visit him, and a colleague of his came by, and they started talking shop. And they mentioned the Apollo launch, and I had not recalled knowing that Charlie worked on the Apollo. So I had my phone at the time, and I pressed record and taped their conversation. And then later on, that took me to researching. And as I started researching everything, I realized, oh my goodness, I know somebody who worked on the Apollo program.
Right.
I became just, I was over the moon about it, to say the least.
Right. No pun intended.
Yeah.
It is incredible to know those people. We uh, have interviewed several, and a lot of them actually went on to start companies in the industry. We've done podcasts, for example, with Dave Hirschberg, who was was on those programs. He actually put the satellite dishes on the ships that would track the mission capsules when they came into the ocean where they used to land, right?
Okay.
And it's just these guys, mostly men, they talk about it, in terms that are not as often as dramatic as I feel, when I'm talking to them about it, because they were these engineers making history. He also, by the way, anybody who's ever heard that podcast, he also developed the first hotline between Russia and Washington after the Cuban Missile Crisis during that period. Wow. And the reason he got the gig was because he's like 23 or 24 years old, was because he was one of the few satellite engineers in the world. And you can only do this by satellite. Put the red phone on those desks and get them to call each other in real time. So wow. It's just incredible, isn't it, to hear those stories?
Yes, it is. And they for me, it was like they speak a different language. So part of me really doing a deep dive into what aerospace was and their accomplishments and how a rocket goes up was just something I had to learn, because when I interviewed these men, I wanted to be able to at least understand what they were telling me. So,
right.
Yeah.
And of course, as the writer and the producer, I guess that's kind of the beauty of the work, right? You're always learning something new.
Exactly. And it was something very foreign. It was like learning a foreign language for the most part.
You're right. Yeah, I know what you mean. When I first started out, I envy you though, being able to take that recording, that story, and then to develop it the way you have. I think it's probably one of the most important things. I mean, the most important thing you can do in our field or as a human being to carry on somebody else's story. I have to ask you, you refer to Compton and other communities in that part of California as part of the background here. What were those communities like in those days?
Well, Compton was a wonderful, like very quaint residential suburb. Um, and a lot of people don't know that our President Bush actually lived in Compton uh, part of his life.
Which one?
So H.W.,
Okay.
the
Father.
senior
Yeah.
Bush, his family lived in Compton because it was a wonderful, wonderful suburb. I mean, I grew up tree-lined streets, cottage bungalows. I used to walk to school, and there was a lot of land in Compton, so people had horses. And there was, I walked past a working dairy farm, and we'd stop and they'd give us fresh milk on the way to school.
Oh,
So, yeah, so it was it was a wonderful community to grow up in.
yeah. And you stayed in California, right? You attended university?
Yes, I went to Long
Okay.
Beach State.
What was your major there? What did you study?
It was journalism, public relations.
Of course. Okay.
Yes.
Um,
Well, yes, it's interesting. Yeah, I wanted to become a foreign correspondent.
wow. And so you end up writing and talking about the moon. That's about as foreign as you can get.
I feel I'm very satisfied.
Right.
I got the foreign part, and I definitely got the correspondent part.
Right.
You are listening to The Better Satellite World, the longest running continuous podcast in the commercial space and satellite industry. The Better Satellite World podcast is funded by the corporate partners of SSPI, Hughes, Access Intelligence, and the American Space Exploration Fund. This podcast is also supported by live event partner Hogan Lovells. Have you heard about SBQ? Space Business Qualified is a popular online learning program for industry professionals designed by JSOA, SSPI, and SatProf. To learn more, visit spacebq.org. And in August and November, join Tamra, Space News Magazine, and the New York Space Alliance for the next New York Space Business Roundtable. If you want to get inside the industry's biggest issues and investments, meet startups and high-profile industry leaders from around the world, the Roundtable is the real New York event you cannot miss. If you like this podcast and are hearing it for the first time, a new podcast drops every Monday. To listen to previously released episodes, visit sspi.org/podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. And now back to the Better Satellite World.
Do you feel like you've told all of the story that needs to be told? Because you've written about this. Of course, I read a lot of the stuff you've written about this. Is there more to the story? Is there a spin-off? Are there other angles to this that you looked at after putting those 4 podcasts together? It was 4 terrific podcasts.
Well, during this process, I did have the opportunity to meet other men. I met a Black rocket scientist who I would love to talk more about his story.
Mm-hmm.
I met a real live astronaut. I had the pleasure of talking to Ed Dwight, who was the first Black astronaut chosen by Kennedy, who unfortunately did not get to go up into space then, but last year was able to go up in space. Yes. So that's been quite remarkable. I think there are a few other people that I'd love to just get their stories as well. And I hope I'll be able to do that.
Yeah, well, I hope you will too. Um, and you talk about a place where, quote, space and race collided. And of course, that's also at the heart of this story. We talk about the other moonshot. And it's fascinating to hear that when we consider the stakes of the Apollo program, the absolute excellence and daring of the engineers and the risks, how did those collisions, right, the mission and the racial collision, how did that feed or detract from the collaboration? Because there was an enormous amount of collaboration that went into this great undertaking.
Right. Yeah. And I think because of the background of these men, first of all, I actually think of these men as like really just extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that really made them extraordinary to me was the way they dealt with their authority being challenged, their analysis being challenged, their work being challenged, and not being paid the same as their white coworkers.
Right.
And but even with this, it never detracted from the work they were tasked to do. And I think their backgrounds growing up provided them with this heavy shield of armor that just kept their eyes were always on the end game. And they always valued this opportunity to be working on such an incredible program. Yeah. So while knowing outside of where they worked, there was a huge civil rights movement going on because this was all happening during the civil rights movement. So they had so many things weighing on them. And they managed to deal with all of them and still create and achieve.
I mean, it's incredible when you think about it. That heavy lift that was going on psychically.
Right.
I mean, it's just remarkable. And yet, did you sense? Because when I listened to you, the sense of vocation was what burned through them the most, right? I mean, they just, like many of us, it's just the love of work, and you can put up with all the other shit around it.
Yes.
Because you see the bigger picture. Did you feel that they had that sense ultimately that was what was driving them?
Yes, they loved. They had such passion for what they were doing, and I think part of that passion came from each one of them being told when they were young boys not to pursue this. That there was, Charlie started architectural school and was told 2 years in, oh, you'll never be able to travel the world and see the architecture you're studying, so you should do something else. Nate was also told he wanted to be a pilot. He was fascinated with planes, and as a young boy, used to go to a place where planes took off and watch them. He wanted to deal with aircraft since he was 8 years old. Mm-hmm. So he had this burning passion and desire. Shelby also went to school and he was very good at math, unlike me. And
right. And by the way, unlike me as well. So we're in the same camp.
had this burning desire to use that and become an engineer. Right. So they definitely were driven by a passion and by being told, no, you can't.
Yeah. And again, their skills sort of morphed and found their way, into this project where they, of course, now are part of history. And Joanne, we have a lot of young people, right, listening to this because they want to get into the industry or they're fascinated by it. And we always tell them there's an example after example after example of people who thought they were going to do one thing or got into the industry for one purpose, but ended up going in another direction. And that's perfectly okay. That's how it works.
Yes.
Yeah. No matter what the obstacles. How did LAist become involved in the project?
Yes. It is LAist. When I first decided to do it, I'm a big fan of LAist. I've been listening to them for years. And I decided I wanted them to do it. So once I decided that, I started going to their events. They do a lot of public events. They're located in South Pasadena. And at one of the events, I sat next to a woman and we started chatting. And she asked me about what I was interested in. I told her about the podcast. And she showed a real interest in it. And I found out later that she was their senior news editor. Her name's Suzanne Levy. And she contacted me and we talked, and she decided this was a story she wanted to champion, and she pitched it to LAist, and they said okay. And I was, of course, really pleased because they were my first choice.
Right. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Yes.
Did Ms. Levy have any connection to the industry? Had she ever done a project before in our industry, space?
Oh, yes. She actually, she has a background working for the BBC. She had been working for LAist for many years. She's an incredible reporter, editor, and she knows the newsroom very, very well.
Right.
So she obviously, I think, knew a good story.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a good one. Speaking of Pasadena, by the way, there's an event at the Crawford Studio in Pasadena on March 13th. You'll be involved in a panel discussion there, so people should check that out. I wanted to get that in there before we closed here. I referred to JFK, who's so central to all of this. In 1961, President Kennedy banned discrimination in the federal workforce, which obviously triggered all of the talent that flowed in behind it, the Nates and the Charlies and Shelbys and everybody else, Gladys West. When you look at that time span between that 1961 banning of discrimination in the federal workforce, and you look at where we are today in 2024, how would you describe the line of progression and regression going all the way through it? I know that's a big question, but
yes. Well,
you're the person to answer it. Yeah.
Okay. I think President Kennedy understood that diversity, equity, and inclusion was important to the space program then. And that's why the mandate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important now. And that's kind of my feeling about it, is that there is a situation in this country where everyone doesn't get the same advantages. So DEI is an important place to change that, to kind of balance those scales out. And
go ahead, please.
Yeah, and so I think we recognize, even during this time, that is still something that's happening. It's still happening in the aerospace industry. When I did an event a few months ago, after the event, I had several young engineers come up to me, Black and Hispanic engineers, who talked to me about still having similar challenges to the ones that these men had now. So I think the thing I think we have to understand is that these challenges are kind of in our dirt, and that these men felt in going to space, it could be different. They get out of the dirt.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah. So I think it's important.
Yeah.
But it still appears to be in the soil and in what we grow.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. I'm going to stay with it. And has there been blossoming and blooming at an accelerated pace in your view, say the last 20 years? And I'm wondering,
Yes.
yeah, and I'm wondering what Charlie and Nate and Shelby would say about that as well.
Well, Charlie, I've spoken to Charlie about that, and he is not as optimistic.
Really?
But he also started right at the crust of everything, right at the very beginning. So he would like for it to have moved a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
But we are all that way, right? When we get anxious about something, the movement that happens, even though it is movement because things are constantly moving, isn't fast enough.
And do you sense also, Joanne, that by telling this story, or maybe you're too close to it, but I'll ask it anyway, that you open up history, and history is a great teacher if anybody wants to pay attention to it, in that it also shows us that, like the Italians when they came here and were, first discriminated against, for example, that if you open up to the cultures, they can give you things, they can give you talents, they can give you innovations, they can give you perspectives that actually feed and make an industry and make a culture better. Are you aware that your work might be contributing to that?
I have definitely, that was something I thought about. Yes, because I do believe in that. I love history, and I love history for that reason. I do believe we learn from it. And it offers us something that's so valuable. And I mean, stories and telling stories are some of the oldest things in the world, right? That's how we gathered around fires, and we told stories to tribes, and they took them to other villages, and they learned and they expanded their knowledge and what they could do. So yes, we know it does that. And that's why it still works.
Yeah, you're right. Yes, history works.
It just works. We don't need to fix it. It works.
Exactly. But you do have to read it, and I'm always bummed out when I hear that 40% of American college freshmen don't know which century the Civil War was fought, and a certain percentage don't know which side won. That always
they seem to be more audible.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, and that's why, I mean, I'm a big fan of podcasts for that reason, because we've become a society of, which I'm happy about, listeners.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Yeah, we are very audible now, and so if you put it where someone can listen to it, your chances of them getting it, I just think are a little bit better.
No question about it. Yeah, it's a different way of consuming the media and consuming information. And yes, and we both obviously like podcasts. Last question for you, Joanne, and I'll let you go because I know you've got a lot of things going on to promote this, to promote the other moonshot. That is, when you look at the series now and reflect that all that went down to tell this story. I mean, you had so many amazing experiences. Is there one memory of the people that you profiled that lingers?
Well, overall, what really stays with me is the way these men were able to navigate their life and their careers, and how, even though very, very different, they they dealt with like the same prejudices and indignities, but they all developed very different ways of coping with it. Um, and that was fascinating for me. I mean, Charlie was this confident person who didn't back down, and he called things out the way he saw them. Nate became a champion golfer, and he showed he garnered strength and respect from his colleagues on the course, and ended up traveling the world playing in the North American Aviation golfing leagues. And Shelby was renowned for his bridge playing. He won like several plaques and awards, and he played bridge on his lunch hours, challenging the other executives and beating them. So those are the things that I realized in all this, that these men developed what I call their superpower skills.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think those were coping mechanisms?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, and very constructive ones too, right?
Yes, right. They were positive and healthy ones, and
right. They
gave them what they needed to continue, and to be present and to show up where others saw. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, it could have put a lesser person down. It could have just sunk them. Right. What heroes? What a star! Yeah, it reminds me of the baseball player Curt Flood. Remember him from St. Louis Cardinals, who challenged the reserve clause in baseball, which made it possible for baseball players today to make the kind of money they're making because they were no longer indentured to the clubs.
Like that, yes.
Yeah, but he just, his passion was baseball, but then, he just worked what he felt was his obligation to the right thing, to justice. I think he said one time, I thank God that he made my skin black. I just wish he'd made it a little thicker.
Yes, I can relate to that, and I'm sure these men can relate to that too. That kind of describes, yes, the resilience that it takes to really persevere. And when you have it, you can move anything.
Yes. And they were, as you say, they were tough, they were resilient, and they were brilliant. And if it wasn't for them, two other persons wouldn't have touched foot on the moon, would they?
Yes, exactly. So it's just remarkable.
It is. Heck of a story, Joanne.
Thank you so much, Lou. I'm just enjoying sharing it, and it's connecting me with so many places that I never thought I would walk.
Oh, I bet. That's right. Well, listen, thanks so much for making the time. I really enjoyed meeting you and speaking with you.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure.
And good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes my conversation with Joanne Higgins. To hear this and other podcasts from the Better Satellite World, go to sSPI.org/podcasts. For the Better Satellite World and our producer, Ari Yates, I'm Lou Zacharilla, reminding you to go up and go out and make it a better satellite world. Take care, everybody.